Hi everyone, and welcome to the Timeless History channel with me, Derek, aka Sal, the Omega Enthusiast. In this episode of We Speak Time, our guests are Tin and Myra, a watch enthusiast couple and fellow Canadians. They found my Instagram page, we exchanged messages, met a few times, and became local friends. Tin will introduce his collection to us, and Myra will interview him. So a big thank you to this beautiful couple for creating this amazing video. Let's begin this exciting episode of We Speak Time.
Hi, I'm Myra, and this is Tin, and we're doing a watch collector video for the Omega Enthusiast. So our friend Sal, the Omega Enthusiast, asked us to do a watch collector video.
Yeah, so we thought we'd do an interview format to do something a little bit different.
Yep. So are you ready for it?
Yep, okay, let's go.
Okay. So while collecting, do you tend to keep the watches that you buy forever, or have you been changing your taste over the years?
For me, it's really, I would say the first is that I tend to actually change my collection a lot because I'm still discovering what I really like and what I don't like. I think that for me, the most important thing actually about the vintage collecting hobby is actually getting to know people and evolving your taste and your style. So the hunt is actually, even for me, a little bit more exciting than the actual purchase of the watch. So learning a little bit about the history of the watch, trying to find the one that's unpolished, for example, and has all the original parts, I find that just as interesting as actually purchasing the watch.
So what are the key traits that you look out for in a watch?
I think every collector develops their own style for how they want to, of what they care the most about. I think for most vintage collectors, you'll often hear that it's about originality. For me, I'm along that themes, but what I focus on the most is the actual dial itself. So you'll see in my collection, a lot of my watches have very clean dials or even patina. So that's like my number one criteria. The second criteria I have is really it's about the case. I really like to have the original shape of the case, so I really look for unpolished watches wherever I can. Hence, like you'll see here that I have 4 vintage pull routers, all looking very similar because I'm actually chasing ones with and trying to understand what an unpolished case actually looks like. So I really like the idea of it being the shape of what it was originally meant to be.
So do you like looking for different varieties of the same kind of watch? Or are you just chasing that perfect reference of that watch?
It's a bit of both. Like I like some of the subtle differences between some of these pull routers, like between these two. I think other people might say they look exactly the same, but they have a different logo. They have different looms. And but I do have sometimes, for example, this is the exact same reference here, because I am trying to figure out which one's the nicer shape, and then I'll be, putting the other one back into the watch enthusiast community once I'm figure out which one I want to keep.
So you have a number of watches here. Would you say that one of these was your Grail watch before, and then do you have a new Grail watch?
Yeah, I'm always hunting for the next watch. I wouldn't call it Grail watches because I don't go for something that's completely, depends how you define Grail watch, it's completely unattainable. For the longest time, I was chasing a really nice Tudor, which I found. This is a neo-vintage 79090 that had a nicely unpolished case. And now I think the next one that I want to get is a Rolex GMT, probably the 16700 reference. For those who don't know, it's like in between of going towards the more modern Rolex watches.
Do they call that one the Pepsi? Is that the red and blue bezel?
Yeah, that's right. That's the one.
What do you like about that particular reference?
What I like about that reference, and what I like about all vintage watches, is that they're a lot thinner than what we have today, with some exceptions. I find my personal feeling is we've gotten too interested in looking at the specs of watches, and that's put a lot of pressure on the watch manufacturers, and a lot of these watches today are much more thicker and bigger. And I like the thinner aspect of the older movement there, which is like the 1670 and below. And there's also, I think, things like the lume that now patina in the older versions of the watch. The modern lume doesn't patina, it doesn't age, so it feels like you lose some of the history, or it just doesn't feel as worn, and that's why I like the Pepsi and the older vintage watches. Yeah.
So our friend Sal is really into vintage watches with his, he usually focuses on vintage Omegas. What is it specifically that triggered your interest in vintage watches?
I always lean towards vintage things when I collect because there's that rarity about it. I also find it easier, especially in the watching world, to justify buying a vintage watch over a modern watch where you have to maybe wait 3 years to get it. And then if you do want to get it right away, you go gray market and you're paying more than what you would get from the actual store. Whereas in vintage, they don't produce these anymore. The Rolex Pepsi that I want to get, it doesn't exist. It's not being produced today. So the amount of money I'm going to spend on it is worth the value of the watch as set by collectors in the industry today.
So are there any modern watches that you like?
Yeah, I like modern watches too. The ones I tend to like have a vintage flair to them. And I would say that this one here, the Santos, it's a modern watch with vintage roots done really right. When you take a look at this, they did it right in a couple ways, I feel. One is that they stuck to a hand-wound movement and kept it nice and thin. The second is that they have this kind of Art Deco feel to it with, I believe this is a lacquer dial, and doing something different. Bringing that time from the past into here.
Is it lacquer dial or is the bezel lacquer?
It's actually the dial's lacquer.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, the dial's lacquer, and the bezel actually is lacquer too there.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And the lacquer and the just surrounding the case there actually really accents. Yeah, I shouldn't have said bezel, but the case itself has pieces of lacquer in it that really highlight the steel in the case. So this is really interesting because it's a very good mix of both of that, and I would say it's a modern watch, but done right with vintage inspirations. So yeah, I do like the modern ones too. The Black Bay 58, the Black Bay 54, I think is really good. I'm really excited about the acquisition. Who is it that acquired the Pole Router, the Universal Genève?
Yeah, Universal Genève.
Yeah.
Wait, sorry. Breitling
yeah.
purchased
Yeah.
Universal Genève.
Yeah.
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 Yeah,
I usually
that's
turn to Myra
amazing.
for these things because she actually knows more about watches than me about what's going on and the brands.
So you're excited about that?
I'm hoping Breitling does it right. I think the only thing I'm concerned about is falling into that trap of focusing on specs, and we're gonna end up with a modern Pole Router that is suddenly thick and long, and I think that takes away from the originality of it. And maybe if it was up to me, I would advise, not that they would listen to me, but I would advise keeping to just upping the proportions a little bit, not going over the top.
So what would you say is your favorite source or sources for new additions to your collection?
I enjoy going through the forums the most in terms of learning about watches, and actually that's where you'll probably get the best deal for watches is from a fellow collector, probably the best priced. But I would say the most reliable source for me are actually professional watch dealers. These tend to get no headache. A lot of them are based off of their brand and reputation. So if there's something wrong, they'll quickly fix that for you. And so my sources are people like Omega Enthusiast, Coin Watch Co., those watch guys, or there are some who are kind of bordering between professional and amateur sellers. I think those are the best people to buy from, especially if you're getting new into the hobby.
So name your 5 favorite vintage watches.
I would say this Omega Seamaster. I don't have the reference number memorized, but I'll put it on the link. But I really like this one because this is the original design that came out for the most part, and it represents an era from the 1950s. I think this one's from 1952, and it represents an era of post-war optimism, and it brings the military roots into the watch, but also upscaled it for the professional gentleman. And so I find this one really interesting. The other one that is my other favorite is going to be this Vintage Explorer 5500. It's actually rarer than the well-known Explorer 1016. Very hard to find original parts. I had to go all the way to South Africa or buy this from South Africa. Went through a lot of hoops to prove its originality with the Rolex Service Center, and this just came back, and I'm pretty happy with how this watch turned out. It's starting to become my number one. I would say the other interesting thing about this watch that I'm very happy with, I was able to actually retrofit a Easy Link into the watch. So for those who don't know, that allows you to kind of adjust it by 5 millimeters longer and bigger. Usually doesn't come with this, and be able to get kind of the modern, comfort, utility out of this onto a vintage watch was pretty cool. So that's why I really like this one. It was a lot of work actually to get this one to where it is. The other favorite would be the pull router. I think the pull router is still undervalued today. This design is very unique. Everybody knows about Gerald Genta, so there's a tie there. But I actually was kind of inspired by this by seeing, I think on Mad Men, I think the main character, Don Draper. He had a black and white crosshair watch on it. So I was looking at it from that perspective. And then I saw these, what they're called, Bombay or Lear, is that how you say it? Lear lugs?
Lear lugs, I think so.
Or lyre lugs, I'm not quite sure. Twisted lugs is the other term. But these lugs are just spectacular in person. It gives a lot of character to the watch, and I can see why those who actually have these types of lugs are so into these watches. So, and I think these are still really affordable today.
So this is the last question. What would your advice be to new watch collectors?
My advice would be to new watch collectors. So one is take your time to learn about it. It's a really enjoyable hobby, and it could be in a good way never ending. There's always some things to do and look at and to hunt for. If you're looking to buy vintage watches, I would recommend a couple forums. I actually would recommend first looking at Omega watches. Omega watches have a very interesting history because Omega as a manufacturer gives you all the parts and they circulate all the parts. So Omega watches are really great watches for an amazing price because there's so many parts floating around that the watchmakers can actually work with it. The second thing is get to know the community before buying your watch.
That's interesting.
And for me, my first vintage watch, actually, real vintage watch came from Omega Enthusiast because I knew that he spent the time and all the parts are going to be authentic. And it's this one here, this Constellation. And it was a really great experience because we actually met him for a coffee to take a look at a bunch of watches. It was you and I, and he actually invited some other enthusiasts.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a really great time. And I was able to pick this watch out and actually buy this with confidence. So, the world of vintage watches, if you start, actually you can start wrong. I have some friends who did start wrong and bought it, and they come back with something that's a Frankenstein or has the wrong parts, and that could really sour the experience. So I would recommend paying a little bit extra for working with a real watch dealer.
Now that you mention it, that meeting, that was one moment where you actually really got inspired to look into watches. I totally forgot about that. I think it was at a Starbucks, right?
Yeah, it was at a Starbucks.
Yeah.
And better see all these different watches and actually see them in real life. They just look way better than the photos and the pictures.
Any other advice?
Don't be afraid of smaller watches. I know, I think it's a really good thing that for those who are in the watch enthusiast community, they've been talking about, smaller watches are in, and for the longest time they're bigger. You'd be surprised. I think you can end up wearing a watch that's too big for your wrist. I don't think that looks good personally, unless you have a certain style that you want to pull it off. But you really can't go wrong with a smaller watch. The other thing is looking at straps. Vintage watches with modern straps look really amazing. Make sure you buy the ones that have, they call the quick release here. That makes it easy for you to change. And you can just really change up the look as you like.
Thank you so much, Sao, for having us on your YouTube channel, the History channel, and on your Instagram account, Omega Enthusiast.
If anybody's interested in vintage watches like I am, feel free to reach out to me on the Linen Dial Instagram, where I'm trying to document all the watches that I've owned or have collected over the years. And from that, I've also started a website, thelinendial.com. it's written, it's like, I'm not a professional writer. It's not written for anything except for myself, honestly. And if people find some of that useful for new collectors, you might find some of the material there. It's just my journey notes and things like that.
That's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed Tin's collection and learned about his watch collecting journey. Let's give Myra and Tin a big thank you. I will include the Instagram account and Tin's website link in the description box below. If you want more content like this, give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing. I look forward to sharing episode 9 in the near future. Of course, you can always support my work on Patreon. If you have any comment or question, please leave them in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the following video.